about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Hello. Oh, and I seem to be on my own, which is strange. I'll just see what's happened to Sarah. No, she's gone. I'll leave a placeholder for her. I'm sure she'll be back in a second. Don't know what's happened there. Good evening. Welcome to our latest GCSE live stream. Last week, I was doing a really good impression of being Sarah. This week, I've got to do an impression of being Vicky. Possibly both of them. I'm hoping Sarah will be back in a moment. I'm sure she'll be joining us in a second. And our subject tonight is divorce. So it's from the families topic. It is one of the subjects that comes up in the advance information. So it's very likely you could be asked about this in your exam in the summer. And we've got a series of activities to consider about this coming up now. And I've got Sarah back with us, hopefully. Here she is. Where are you, Sarah? There she is. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, sorry. I disappeared for a minute, but I'm back.
Absolutely. And we're going straight over to Sarah now to start our first activity, which is a true or false one. So here we go.
Fantastic. So a nice warm-up with a true or false. So thinking about divorce, is it true or is it false that around 42% of all marriages end in divorce? What do we think? Looking forward to seeing your contributions coming in.
I just realised I didn't do one of our normal introduction points, so I'll just say, Anonymous already knows what to do. I'll just say, if you're watching live, do put in true or false into the chat window, or TRF. If you're watching on catch up, you can pause the video and have a bit longer to think if you like. Sorry, Sarah, you carry on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Duncan. So we've got lots of people saying true. So let's reveal the answer. And well done, everyone. What a fantastic start. It is definitely true. The next is another trends, true or false. So divorce cases have increased since 2010. Do we think that's true or do we think that's false? So pop your answers in the chat window. Let's see. Have divorce cases increased in the last 12 years? I think from some people that were with partners during lockdown, they might feel as though it possibly has. So we've got some suggestions here that may be false. So let's have a look at the answer, please, Duncan. That is, in fact, false. So strangely, and we may not know yet whether that is an anomaly, but it looks as though there might be some small decrease in the number of divorces in recent years. And let's have a look at the next one. So well done there. So, true or false? In 1993, there were a record number of divorces in the UK with 165,000 divorces. So, is that true? Was it a record number of divorces? What do you think? Let's see what's coming through in the chat window. People are furiously typing away. And it's told us, there we go, that is actually true. So that's a really nice, and we've had some truths suggested in the chat as well. Well done. And that's a really nice bit of data that you can bring in if you need to apply some data to your paragraphs. And we've got two more to look at. So let's have the next one up, please, Duncan. Thank you. Did the Divorce Reform Act come into law in 1969? Is that true or false? What do you think? That should be a very core bit of knowledge. If you're feeling confident with the area of divorce, should be one of your core legislations that you can talk about. So we've got some suggestions of that being true. Let's have a look at the answer. And that is absolutely true. So the Divorce Reform Act of 1969, really core piece of evidence for us there. And our final true or false, please, Duncan. The decrease in recent divorce cases is due to a decrease in secularisation. What do you think? Quite a lot of aspects of that sentence to weigh up there.
I was going to say, it's a decrease in secularisation almost feels like a double negative, doesn't it? So we need to work out what we mean by that.
Does.
So there's less secularisation, so more religion? Would that be what?
Yes, that kind of re-enchantment with religion.
Yeah.
Is that happening, and would those two things be linked together? So we've got a mix of answers coming through. So let's reveal whether that's true or false, please, Duncan. That is, in fact, false. So although divorce gets linked with secularisation itself, so we might say that the increase in divorce is possibly linked to people being less religious, and we don't necessarily put those factors together there that are in the sentence. Fantastic. So we are going to have a quick look at what you need to know for this topic area. So you need to be familiar with the reasons for the increase in divorce, and we'll be taking you through these today. You need to be familiar with changes in legislation, like you had a taster of that just now with the 1969 Reform Act, consequences of divorce for different groups of people and different individuals involved, and different perspectives on divorce from our familiar key sociological perspectives. So I'm going to hand over to Duncan, who is going to talk to us about what divorce is.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, so what is divorce? I think we know, don't we? Divorce is when two people end their marriage, legally terminate their marriage. And as we've just seen in the true or false, round about 42% of all marriages end in divorce, and around a quarter of all UK households are lone parent families. Not all of those as a result of divorce, of course, but it's one factor. Today, around about 70% of the petitions for divorce come from women, and that's compared with only 37% of petitions for divorce in 1946. Now, there are some very specific reasons for that, but we're going to come on to those later, so I won't give away any spoilers at this point, but you may well know why that change has occurred. So we're going to look at an activity called the Data Lab, and I like this activity. I don't know if you've seen it before, but if you haven't, I hope you enjoy it. We're going to look at some data. We're going to analyse some data. So we've got some data on total divorces in the UK. We're going to put a clock up in a second. I'd like you, initially at least, to describe the trend in divorce cases in the UK. So you'll see that. Can you describe it? You might want to suggest some reasons for it, but again, we're going to talk about that later, so we won't necessarily go into a lot of detail about the reasons now. You might want to, but yeah, that might be interesting. So I want you to describe the trend, maybe account for it. Anything else interesting you can tell me about the data that you can see there. Here we go. It goes back to that true or false question earlier, doesn't it, about whether divorce had been increasing since or decreasing since 2010. Anyway, see what you make of it. We've got some mean and moody music to entertain you while you type. So start off with describing what's happening to that divorce cases. What are we seeing there? Yeah, so NG's saying that fewer people are getting married. That's an interesting, yeah. That's not what the data's showing us, but that might very well be an important factor. We'll come to that in a second. Okay, so the total number of divorce cases are decreasing over the years. It's come from Anonymous. This could be because of the decrease in the marriages taking place, which was NG's point on the comment before. Yeah, so because there has also been a decline in marriage, it sort of almost becomes inevitable eventually that the divorce numbers would start to decrease because there are fewer married couples to get divorced. And Alice has said that both marriage and divorce are expensive. Yeah, absolutely. So that could well be a factor in both those trends, couldn't it? Both the decline in marriages and the decline in divorces. So that's interesting. Some interesting data there. Now, we saw earlier the record from 1993, didn't we, which was a little higher than that. But although we're seeing a decline there, I think it is worth bearing in mind that we're seeing a decline, from a very high number, historically very high number, and still is historically high. But yes, in terms of describing it, divorce cases are declining or have been declining year on year, for about 120,000 in 2010 to around 90,000 in 2018. Now, it'd be interesting to know what's happened in the last couple of years. That might be some interesting research to have a look at. Sarah mentioned the impact of lockdown, etc. earlier. That'd be interesting to see whether that has had an impact on the number of divorces. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of ongoing research into this as a topic. Okay, I'm going to pass back to Sarah now. Okay.
Thanks, Duncan. So, although we recognise that there's been this decrease in divorce as a recent trend, we're also interested in why divorce has increased since, kind of the 1950s, really. And obviously, we've got the legislation part of that, which we've touched on already, and Duncan will be taking us through that in a moment. But I'm just going to take you through 4 key reasons before we look at legislation for why divorce may have increased. And one of those is this idea of our changing notions of love and of what marriage really means. So Anthony Giddens talked about something called confluent love. So he talked about this kind of pure love and this idea that we don't stay in a marriage unless it feels like pure love. So we don't stay in it for obligation or because we have to. We don't stay in it for convenience or necessarily financial security, and that will link to other reasons we'll look at in a minute. So people are more likely to file for divorce if they fell out of love with their partner. So we see less of those kind of empty shell marriages that are carrying on for other reasons than love. So that's our first reason. And then our second reason, thank you, Duncan, is the increase of dual earner families. So essentially, women now have more financial independence. So in previous generations, women who stayed at home and were homemakers or stay-at-home mums would have been dependent on the partner's income. But now women have their own income generally, so they're far more likely to be able to walk away because they know they can have financial independence. They know they can bring up their children. They also know that they can get support from the welfare state if they're not completely self-sufficient. And there's better legislation in place now to get child support from the father and to make sure that that support is there for single parent families. So we've got the increase of dual earner families as our second reason. And our third reason, we touched on secularisation in our first activity. So there is an argument that more people are getting divorced because there's less significance that used to come from religion that we placed on marriage. So over half of first-time marriages now aren't religious at all. They are civil ceremonies. So we're seeing a decline of the church being involved in the marriage process. Divorce also has lost its stigma. It's not seen shameful. You wouldn't be shunned from attending church or your local community for being divorced. It's quite normalised in our society, and it's now seen as a choice rather than a failure. So people are no longer, therefore, staying together for the sake of appearances, staying together for the sake of the children, because there isn't this stigma and judgment in society. And even within Christian communities, it's generally accepted that children are better off not living in a tense or toxic or unhappy home. So we've got the decrease in religion linking with an increase in divorce. And that takes us on to our fourth reason. And the fourth reason is the fact that people are living for longer. So we have an increased life expectancy. People are living to, I think, around the age of 80. And that has increased as the years have gone on. And what that means is because we're around for longer, we're less likely to stick in that unhappy marriage because there are far more years that we would have to put up with it. So people are more likely to walk away because they don't want to be miserable for longer, whereas that time might have been limited. People may not have ended up in the situation where their children had moved out of home and they realised maybe they didn't have much in common anymore. So many people are seeking their second chance of happiness due to there simply being more years available, but also possibly more years to get sick of each other and decide that enough's enough. So we've got our four reasons there. My very jaded view on divorce there. Our four reasons there, very empowering reasons. But we're going to look at legislation now because that's really, really important part of the arguments you can build. Over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, so one very important factor alongside those ones that Sarah just told us about is changes to the law. And before the 1969 Divorce Reform Act, divorce was really only open to wealthy men. It was a very expensive thing to do, and there were very limited grounds on which women could file for divorce, basically on the grounds of adultery, but they needed evidence of that adultery. So it was a very expensive business, very unlikely that many women would file for divorce. The 1969 Divorce Reform Act added the idea that divorce could take place because of irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. As long as people have been married for 2 years, then if they could say that essentially the marriage had broken down irretrievably, then you could get divorced, or you could file for divorce. And this did see a significant increase in the number of divorces. There have been some other changes to the law that it's worth knowing about as well. That 2 years was reduced to 1 year in 1984. It's interesting that there were concerns about, as we mentioned, 1993, the very high number of divorces, and some voices in government were concerned that there were too many divorces and perhaps people were getting divorced too quickly and easily. And so the 1996 Family Law Act tried to slow down divorce proceedings, although not particularly effectively. In 2007, there was this idea that you could have the 50-50 split of all assets, so salary, pension, etc. And then coming April 2022, that's hot off the press, it hasn't happened yet, the idea of no-fault divorce, so you no longer have to say that someone was to blame for that irretrievable breakdown in the marriage, which again will probably make it a slightly sort of easier prospect, and hopefully a less stressful one too. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Sarah for the connection spinner.
Brilliant. So we're going to do 2 connection spinners here, and these are great because they get you to really start exploring the impact and consequences of these sociological events. So we're going to look at the consequence of divorce, and that we're going to have on the screen in a minute all of the different groups that could be affected by divorce. And we're going to see where the spinner lands, and then we'll be asking you to put in the chat window what you think the consequences will be on that particular group. So let's get the spinner going, please, Duncan. Where will it land? Oh, there we go. So it has stopped on the partners in the relationship. So we are looking for the consequences. What do you think will be the effect on the partners in the relationship where divorce is taking place? So please give us some of your suggestions in the chat window. Have a think about this. Or if you're watching on replay, you might want to pause now and write down some of your ideas before resuming. And we've got some answers coming in already. You're on fire today. Well done. So Anonymous is saying there might be disagreements over property and distribution of wealth. Fantastic. So that could be an effect, is the stress of that. Yes. So it could be a stressful process. Do we have any other suggestions coming in? I think we will have a look at the suggested answers here, please, Duncan. So one of the key consequences could be that those people will probably end up happier with more kind of satisfaction in their quality of life. But of course, it does depend on the circumstances.
Might be that one is and one isn't.
Yes, yeah, not both parties, unless it's very amicable and a kind of joint decision, it may not be the case. However, both of them will end up going through the legal process, which, as we said, and as Anonymous pointed out, could be very stressful, could lead to financial difficulties, and might mean things like having to sell assets like the family home, and therefore having to move and relocate as well. So lots to think about there in terms of implications. And let's have a look at the next spinner. So we're going to have a look at the same groups again, and we're going to see where it lands. So let's explore another group. Get that spinner going. Thank you, Duncan. Where's it going to land this time? Slowing down. New partners. So we're thinking there about the idea of the reconstituted families and remarrying. What might be the effect on new partners? Why might they be affected where there's divorce involved? What do you think? Give us your ideas in the chat window. If you're watching on replay, feel free to pause now to have a really good think about this and then resume when you're ready. Okay, let's have a look at those suggested responses. So the new partners, because there's been divorce for one or both of the new partners, they may have to take on the emotional baggage of their new partner's previous relationship. There may be still kind of, financial negotiations going on. There may be roles of step parents, children to take on, and relationships to negotiate there. So there's quite a lot to think about in terms of new partners. And we've just looked at 2 of these in this activity. But then if you think about, and this would be a great time to pause if you're watching on replay, pause and think about the other groups as well, because you need to be able to talk about the impact on various groups. Friends could be impacted in terms of feeling as though they have to choose. Children could be impacted because of potential trauma, but also picking up on the stress and maybe then having to live between 2 houses. Stepchildren, similar to new partners, there'll be new relationships to negotiate there. Extended family can be positive, but also can be negative. So there's a whole range of kind of stakeholders of divorce there to consider. And Duncan now is going to talk to us about the functionalist perspective of divorce.
Okay, so we're going to look through a few of the perspectives now. We'll start with functionalism, who sort of traditionally, of course, favoured the nuclear family and the stability of the nuclear family, but for the most part would see, a positive function of divorce as a way out of an unhappy marriage and the potential chance to start again. Fletcher talked about norms and values and expectations evolving and people placing a higher value on their marriage. That does link to Giddens, who comes from a sort of late modernist perspective rather than a functionalist perspective. He talks, as Sarah mentioned before, about this idea of pure love and wanting the perfect relationship, the pure relationship, as being a more important thing than being stable and secure, linked to other social changes. Marxists would tend to put divorce down to being the fault of capitalism. They tend to think most things are the fault of capitalism, and divorce is no different. The stresses and strains of a capitalist society put stresses and strains on couples and can lead to divorce. Financial factors often are a factor in breakdowns in relationships. In the 1970s, there was this need for dual earner families from a Marxist perspective and a Marxist feminist perspective. This was due to the inflation at that time. I don't know what we do now with the massive. If we have a lot of inflation now, we can't have. We haven't got another partner in there to send out to work. We'll have to bring back child labour, I think. But there was the idea of a crisis of capitalism and high levels of inflation in the 70s, meaning that both partners had to go out to work, and the idea that this created the dual burden. And we have this idea from Zaretsky of the family being a kind of a way in which the frustrations of the male worker could be relieved, which is a very similar idea to some Marxist feminist ideas about which I won't use because there's a swear word in it, but there are some theories there about how women essentially put up with the stress and strain of a male worker, and again these could have an impact on relationships and cause divorces. Feminists have long argued in favour of making divorce easier for women, to give women equality, and make it easier for women to leave relationships. I think NG in the chat window earlier mentioned about the idea that women might find themselves financially dependent on men and therefore they can't consider divorce. And so some of the reforms to divorce laws that we mentioned have tried to deal with that issue. The idea that the marriage is kind of prison for women, keeping them in unhappy, dysfunctional, often dangerous relationships, and from a liberal feminist perspective, that there has been significant improvement in that, and now 2/3 or more of divorces are filed by women. In terms of the new right, they, like we mentioned with the functionalists, traditionally they favoured the nuclear family. New right do, and they see divorce as a failure of marriage and as threatening both the nuclear family and society more generally, and the stability of society. Someone like Murray looks at the increase in lone parent families as being a major problem in society. It leads to children being more likely to fail at school, being more likely to be involved in crime, and he puts this down to a lack of male role models. And obviously this isn't just about divorce, but divorce is one of the factors. So a new right view of divorce is that it's too cheap, too easy, too quick. One of the factors in some of those changes I mentioned when trying to go the other way, like the 1996 law that I mentioned, was partly influenced by a new right perspective. Okay, so lots of different ideas there. I think this is me as well, some altered vowels. So here's some key terms, including lots we've talked about, but we've swapped the vowels right to make some words that it's very hard to pronounce, but I'll have a go. But can you work out what the actual word is? So the vowels have been swapped around in these words, or taken out and replaced with different vowels, but it's a key term relating to divorce. So this one, edulturi, something like that. What do we reckon? What word is that? A couple of answers coming through. Well done if you got it. It was adultery. Okay, next one. Desertune. Any thoughts? Just need to swap those vowels around. Change them to different vowels to make a key term relating to divorce. It is desertion. Yeah, the idea that someone's deserted their partner. We've definitely mentioned this one a couple of times, but not like this. Secularisation. Something like that. Secularisation. I always try and pronounce them. I normally sort of find it easier than today. I'm struggling with the pronunciations today, I think. Any ideas? It's a word that's come up a few times today relating to religion. Well done if you got it. It was secularisation. This one's easier than it initially looks. Irretrievably breakdown. If you remember, we talked about the grounds for which a divorce can be petitioned for. The change that came in the 1969 legislation. It was they could petition for divorce on the grounds of irretrievable breakdown. And I think this is finally. We've got Daverco Reform Ict. Daverco Reform Ict. Again, I think you know that. I've just talked about it, really. Yeah, a few right answers came through there. It is the Divorce Reform Act. Well done, guys. I'm going to hand back to Sarah now to think about some exam questions. Oh, nearly anonymous.
Thanks, I think if anyone had come into that part of the session, they might have thought we were doing a revision session on Latin rather than sociology. So we're going to have a look at what would happen if you were faced with a 12 marker on this topic, which, as we know, is highly likely. So we're going to look at a question that asks you to discuss, so that's the command word, discuss, how far sociologists would agree that changes in the law have led to an increase in the divorce rate since the 1970s. So it's very important there to make sure you take note of the time frame, and this happens with a lot of other questions as well. Take note of the time frame that they want you to apply this to, because if you look outside of that time frame, you'll get NAQ, not answering the question, when your work is being looked at. So we're going to have a look at some exam gold and some suggestions today and how you would go about structuring this question. If you're watching on replay, you may want to press pause and have a go at this point. And what we're going to do is we're going to go straight through and look at some tips and the ways to maximize and reach the top mark band for this. So things you might want to consider would be some of the legal changes that we have looked at in today's session. You may also, because this question asks you to discuss, it's inviting you to bring in some balance. So you may also look at opposing arguments. So you could say, well, actually, it's not only it's not the only argument that divorce rates have increased being because of legal changes, but there are other aspects as well. Increase in women's independence, which some people refer to in exams as the rise of feminism, but also this whole attitude of starting to prioritize love over security. But there's also that idea that secularisation or the decline of religion has contributed to the increase in divorce. So we're looking for you to really, give us some reasons why you agree with the point that's being made there, but also to show the balance and understand that there are other sides and other explanations.
Can I put you on the can I put you on the spot really quickly, Sarah? And I apologise in advance for doing this. But you mentioned about the importance of the time frame there and not going outside the time frame. Would it be okay, do you think, to talk about the 1969 Divorce Reform Act on the basis that the impact of that is unlikely to have been felt before the 70s, as it was a new piece of legislation? We think we're all right to talk about that.
That's what you just took the words out of my mouth there. You took the words out of my mouth there. I think that's absolutely. I think if you phrase this carefully and you say that because that law had only come in 1969, the impact and the implementation of that becoming the norm for people who are thinking about getting divorced is going to impact in the 1970s. So I think as long as you're aware of that, then you're definitely okay. And of course, that's one of our core bits of legislation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's definitely important to, yeah. And of course, showing an awareness as well that divorce legislation has been tweaked and altered in the following years after that. But of course, the story already starts in 1969, doesn't it? Yes. So our exam gold here. So it's a 12 marker. The examiner wants to see a balanced argument presented. You do need to show, to get the full marks for this question, you do need to show balance, so you're looking at both sides. You'll need to back up the points that you make with concepts and theories. So you're bringing those in to support the statements that you're making and showing that you've got sociological evidence in order to argue for and against the statement. You need to write in developed paragraphs. So this is not the kind of question where you can bullet point your answers or write in note form. You need to really use those paragraph skills that you've no doubt been working on in order to maximize the top mark bands here. You need to use that sociological language in order to do all of that. So, really practicing using your vocabulary and the key terms that you would bring into a question on this topic is really important. For example, you would bring in and you would develop the laws and the theories. So if you were going to develop Gideon's example of romantic love, you would bring in some of those sociological terms such as pure love or confluent love or changes in attitudes or society changing attitudes. And then the 12 marker also requires you, once you've developed your points, to also have a conclusion which does show some judgment. So you do need to have that concluding aspect of this essay showing some judgment. And when you show that judgment, really going back to the key wording from the question is really helpful there to make sure that you've got a focused evaluation. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at an EVAL-U-WHEEL, which really takes these skills a bit further and helps us have a real practical go at building these skills to get this 12 out of 12. So you're going to see a line of argument that a student has made, okay, and that is the Divorce Reform Act of 1969 means that it was easier for people to obtain a divorce. And what we're looking at is how we might evaluate this statement. And we've got several ways to evaluate, and we're going to see what the wheel tells us that it would like us to use. So let's see. I do love the sound effect on this one. Okay, so this is asking for a strength. So what is a strength of this particular argument? So have a think. This might be a moment where you'd like to pause if you're watching on replay, and you can have a think about the strength of this argument or consult your lesson notes and put together a couple of sentences in response. And we are going to show you on screen a suggestion that you could use as a strength of this point. And we've got some good suggestions coming through in the chat, actually. Well done. So let's have a look at one strength you could use. So you could write about this by saying, up until this point, you had to prove adultery or mental cruelty. It was really difficult to prove your reasons for divorce. The Divorce Reform Act introduced new grounds, which was, and this is another key term, vocabulary that you can bring in, irretrievable breakdown was a new aspect to citing that you wanted divorce. And this covered many more factors. So it brought in a whole load of extra reasons that were far easier to prove. And therefore, arguably, that's a real strength of the argument, is that, this was there's definitely some evidence to support this. So let's have a look at another one. So if we spin the spinner again, we'll see, because there's always many ways you can evaluate the points that you make. What have we got? So can you suggest an alternative? So we looked at a strength just now, but actually what if you wanted to say, however, there are other arguments out there that could be an alternative to this argument? What might you include? So again, if you're watching this on replay, this could be a point to press pause so that you could spend some time thinking of that alternative and having a go at writing it in full. And we've got a couple of suggestions coming through in the chat. Fantastic. Let's have a look at a suggested response here. So how could we evaluate this argument that it was easier to get divorced from 1969 onwards? And a really nice way of showing and signalling to the examiner that you are about to evaluate this is saying, whilst this is true, there are many other factors which have led to an increase in divorce. So you're really saying, look, I'm about to evaluate. I'm going to show you, Mr. or Mrs. or non-binary examiner, that I'm aware of more than one competing argument. So, such as the decline of religion. So they've been really clear saying which argument they're going to use. And then they've developed this by saying divorce is not seen as shameful like it was in the past, which has meant people are free to divorce without fear or guilt. So they're arguing that there are more contributing factors to this increase in divorce rather than just the Divorce Reform Act. And they've developed this a bit further by saying it also means that couples are no longer staying together for the sake of the children and that an unhappy home. So a really well-developed evaluation there. So well done for those of you that put some fantastic contributions in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Did we go backwards?
I think we've got one more. Oh, no. I am going backwards. Sorry. There we go.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I thought there was another one for a second, but I knew there wasn't.
Right. We were hoping for another one. And
yeah,
of course, feel free to press pause on that and go back and look at criticisms or alternatives or limitations.
Absolutely, yeah, or evidence.
Evaluation.
Yeah, fantastic.
Lots you can do with that activity.
Yeah, some great answers in the chat window, well, as always, actually. Just a quick reminder that if you've got a smart device, you can scan that QR code there, and there are lots of activities and study notes on the Tutor2U website, and we do also have lots of resources that you can get from us, such as the student workbooks, the ever popular GCSE student workbooks, the revision question cards, key thinker question cards, and we also have the catch up and grade booster digital courses that you can sign up to, which have loads of content on them from Sarah, Vicky, myself, and many other contributors. Okay, I'm going to come back to the studio if I press the right button. Here we go. Yes, that's all right. I pressed the right button. That's good. Thanks again. Just a quick mention, if you go to tutor2u.net/live, you can watch this and all the other sessions that we've done in your own time, and you can download the PowerPoint slides if you want to use those for your revision and in your notes. If you haven't already, please press like on the video, and that'll help other people find these videos. And if you're not already subscribed to Tutor2U, then do so, and then you'll know when we're going live next, and also potentially find out about other subjects that you do, and if we're doing some sessions for those too. Okay, great to really enjoyable session. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
Well done, everyone. That was great.
Bye.